My name is Hemu Nigam, or Hemu for short, and I am today the founder of SSP Blue, which, in case anybody's wondering, is your blueprint for safety, security, and privacy. But before I did that, I spent my last 20 years in all sorts of different locations, from everything from being a street prosecutor in the LADA's office to a internet crimes against children, a computer crime prosecutor in the Justice Department, did internet piracy for the movie studios, worked at Microsoft on security enforcement, on product strategy, on child safety strategy, and then eventually was recruited by MySpace and News Corp to fix the problem that was happening when internet predators were going after kids online. And there was a huge panic around that situation, and people were trying to figure out what to do. The attorneys general were saying, you're the one who created this, it's your fault, you do something. Then after about 4 years of everything from crisis to implementing a holistic strategy, I ended up moving on, and we started our own company doing the same thing from the outside in. But more importantly for today's panel, it is interestingly what I would call, I don't know if it's microcosm is the right word, but it's an example of what happens every single time a new set of technologies come out and people start using it, and they start going from the early adopters to the second line of adopters to the kids getting used to it to the parents not sure about it, and then there's a panic. And the panic usually is blame the company, do something. In this particular situation, in a very unusual way, this was different. And it was different because as a prosecutor, I spent many, many years. I specialized in sex crimes and child molestation and child abuse and in murders of children. And every single time, the person we were protecting was that child. It was the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 5-year-old, or the 18-month-old baby. And this particular time, something interesting happened. The very people we were supposed to be protecting, we were prosecuting. And if you think back when sexting first started, I was CSO at News Corp and MySpace at the time and watched it evolve, watched these devices coming in and people sexting. Before it was called texting, and then it turned into sexting. And you know what? The funny thing is, when you think about it, and I'm gonna do some lighthearted things as we go along because it's a tough topic, is if you actually think about what sexting is, it's something that's been around for hundreds of years. And usually it was an adult, and she'd be really excited because I just did some what? Dirty talk. That's what it was. And you couldn't do dirty talk on email, which is why there's no such thing as C-mail, right? Or sex mail. But the moment IM and chat rooms came about, there was that real-time interaction devoid of the emotional feeling in your voice that the person hears, but it was still good enough to get the point across. Now, will you tell everybody I said nothing when I whispered in your ear? I got to correct, people need to know that. I didn't say a word. I just went about, okay? But the reality is, that's what sexting is. Now, if you look at stats, and I'm going to ask Dana later on after we introduce our panel to talk about these things, but the adults do it just as much, actually more, than children do. But what did we do about it? We prosecuted, and this is easier to just to read it, 5 Virginia teens charged with felonies in sexting case. 5 teens were charged based on the amount of pornographic images found on their phones, and you had U.S. teen cuffed for sending nude phone pics of herself. You had a teen faces child porn charges. You had a teen who was 15 facing child porn charges, teen charged in sexting case, middle school student charged in sexting case. And the headlines were going on and on and on. And the law that was being used to go after those kids was the same law that I used in the Justice Department to go after that vicious criminal who was called a predator. The very law we were creating to protect those kids we were using against the children and the teenagers. And there was this panic. So over time, that has started to change. Now you were saying, I think there's about 20 different states, including New York, that are trying to pass laws saying instead of putting you in jail, instead of making you register as a sex offender for life, why don't we make it so that you are now going to get counseling? You're going to learn about what the ramifications are. You're going to think about it. You may have to go through some sort of community service, and eventually these things will get wiped from your background. But during that process, you're going to learn something about the power of technology, and maybe the best way to say it, the internet has a memory and it never forgets, and help teenagers and kids to understand that. So, joining me now are our three panelists. And we have representatives from the technology industry, actually 3 technology industries, although I still think of Dana Boyd as a researcher working inside the most largest technology in the world, which is Microsoft. But let me do this. I'm going to introduce you first, Dana, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give 5 minutes of what they saw happening many years ago and their version of, or their vision of how it's evolving today. Because at the end of all this, I'd rather have people leave with a sense of hope than a feeling of despair. Okay? So Dana Boyd has studied what kids do online for, as she would say, many, many, many years. And going everything from a master's to a PhD to now working at Microsoft Research, studying these topics. Jack McCartney, who's at the end, has been at Verizon for also many, many, many years. And he has been focused on leading the charge when it comes to internet safety from a product perspective, from a deal-making perspective with partners, from an education perspective. And I have to admit, I forgot my last name because I've...
Michelle Chisholm.
Right, that's why, because I had trouble saying it. So Michelle Chisholm has been at Sprint, focused on internet safety, education, awareness. How do you get the masses out there to understand that these things can be dealt with? There are things you can do, there are tips you can follow, there's education you can impart on others, there's ways to talk to children.